are so many people that come to the book, yes, because they want to hear about the mothers, but there are also many people who come to the book because they want to learn more about these three men. Either way, they're going to walk away with knowledge about three incredible Black women who all did what their sons later became famous for, long before their sons were even a thought in their mind.
We already know what helps. Connection is the cure. It's our deep and meaningful relationships that give us hope and healing. Welcome to This Helps. I'm Marlon Morgan. Join us as we practice authentic and vulnerable conversations that inspire us to go deeper with the people in our own lives.
I'm Hannah Ravitch, and we're so excited to have New York Times bestselling author and storyteller Anna Malaika Tubbs with us today.
Thanks for having me.
With a PhD in sociology and a master's in multidisciplinary gender studies, Anna translates her academic knowledge into stories about understandings of race, gender, and equity. Her work can be found across platforms including Time, The Guardian, CNN, New York Magazine, and she has a TED Talk with over 2 million views. Anna joins us today to show us how difficult conversations can lead to love and understanding.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure. We are fans.
Thank you.
And, your first book, The Three Mothers we have here, we don't have a paper copy of another book that I'm not sure if we can talk about.
We can, absolutely.
Okay.
My next book, Erased, What American Patriarchy Has Hidden from Us, comes out on May 20th.
Well, it's an excellent book, and I wanted to start out talking a little bit about your first book because it sort of led to your next book in a way that made complete sense to me once I read how that happened. Mm-hmm. But tell us about The Three Mothers. Just give us a brief understanding for people who haven't read it. A lot of people have. It was on the New York Times bestsellers list. It's one of the only places, from my understanding, that you can get the information because most of it's original research.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point, I think.
Exactly. The Three Mothers is about the mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And I tell their mothers' life stories. And their mothers' names were Alberta King, Louise Little, and Bertus Baldwin. And it's the subject also of my PhD dissertation. I started writing this book before I became a mother myself. I always wanted to really highlight the role of motherhood and the power of motherhood. I had a powerful mom who advocated for women's rights in the U.S. and abroad, and who always spoke to the importance of this role in society and how many places didn't pay attention to that and didn't honor that, but that the places that did would do well. That there would be more happiness in these communities, that there would be more longevity, that there'd be more peace, all of these things. Mm-hmm. She related back to the treatment of mothers and the respect for the role of motherhood. And so fast forward to my PhD, I knew I wanted to do something around motherhood, but I also wanted to add that advocacy for Black women in particular. I read Hidden Figures, the book by Margot Shetterly, and saw the film, and I was really inspired by the way in which she was changing minds simply by telling the stories of people who lived and who we didn't know about and who had strategically been erased and hidden. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I'm going to be somebody who finds hidden figures. I'm going to find other Black women that we should all know about. And maybe let me think about the mothers of some of the people that we celebrate the most and that we write about the most and analyze the most, but who we've never asked this particular question about. And I wanted to sort of use the hook of patriarchy. Mm-hmm. There are so many people that come to the book, yes, because they want to hear about the mothers, but there are also many people who come to the book because they want to learn more about these three men. And either way, if they come to the book because they are fans of these three men or because they're excited to finally hear the stories that we didn't know, they're going to walk away with knowledge about three incredible Black women who all did what their sons later became famous for, long before their sons were even a thought in their mind. And so that's what leads to my next book. Everybody who reads The Three Mothers has this experience of shock
Yes,
and
as
kind of
did I.
surprise. How did we not know that? These men who were so well studied, so many books about them, we were never told that MLK Jr.'s mother was the daughter of the leaders of Ebenezer Baptist Church, that this was her family church, not
Right.
the dad's, but hers, that when she got married, her husband moved in with her, that she was well educated and she participated in boycotts and in marches. Like everything that we celebrate MLK for was Alberta King. How did we not know that? And if we look at Louise Little, Malcolm X's mother, a radical activist who believed in Black independence and Black self-sufficiency, who was a Marcus Garvey, not only follower, but involved in the organization, a leader, and who meets her husband because they're both organizers for Marcus Garvey, this incredible Pan-African movement. And we didn't know that's how Malcolm X became who he became.
All of the stories make complete sense when you're reading them.
Yeah.
They're like, this is the fertile soil that these amazing trees grew up in. And that doesn't do it justice because they came from other incredible trees.
Exactly. And that they're even the
forest.
mothers were a part of legacies and generations of this activism. And with Bertis Baldwin being this incredible writer, and even though she didn't have the opportunities to be published, all the letters that she gifted her loved ones were filled with such beautiful writing that even the teachers who taught James Baldwin said that they knew he inherited his skill from his mother based off of letters she would write just to excuse his absences. And so these are shocking details for us to discover when my book came out in 2021, when we'd studied these men for so many years. And so everyone always asks me, how did this happen? How were they erased? Why did we forget about them in history? And for me, the answer is so simple, but also quite complicated. But the simple part is to say patriarchy, American patriarchy in particular, where the intersection of racism, classism, all the other, forms of discrimination make it so that Black women are not going to be valued in our nation while they're alive. And certainly when they've passed away, we are going to erase their contributions. And so I realized we needed a book that made patriarchy as obvious to everybody else as it is to someone like me, who studies these particular life experiences, because we can't continue to be caught off guard by a system that was designed to erase some of us and designed to keep some of us from telling our side of the story. And so I'll leave it there because I know this is a very long answer to just one question, but that's how Erased came to be.
Yeah. Well, that's why we want you here to explain it. I think I had the same questions and going through it and constantly being reminded how important my mom was, for me and still is. And then to see kind of, it doesn't make sense, like from nothing comes nothing. Like they didn't just show up and it's like, I'm Malcolm X, I am a strong leader with great glasses and I'll do anything it takes to make sure I get this point across and for the people that I love. So to hear and to see how they grew up and to see how it could have been just a little bit different, or maybe one of those moms didn't sort of stick to it or didn't prioritize, having a child. What would that have been like? What would we have missed out on?
Right.
And that it started to kind of scare me throughout. But I ended up with the same questions. Patriarchy, the answer made sense, but it was like it took a book for myself to understand. I come from on my dad's side, my grandfather was the first Black judge in Sacramento, second in California.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. So I got to hear from him, growing up, what it was like to be at McGeorge Law School and be the only person of color, literally the only person of color there. And unfortunately, there were no women of color. It was, he was the person, and having to get perfect scores on his tests He tutored everyone else, all the other students, because if he got one or two wrong in the wrong class, obviously he wouldn't get passed through.
Yeah.
So
he had to be perfect.
That is exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that took a toll, and that's a whole different story, but it did keep reminding me of kind of what it takes. It also reminded me of the quote, about President Obama, who walked on ice for 8 years, but never fell.
Yeah.
So
his whole life, pretty much. Yeah. Him and Michelle.
Yes. And talk about mothers too. His mother.
Yes.
She was obviously much more formative, in my opinion, than his father.
Yeah.
Obviously she was there.
This is a really good point.
So, maybe we need another book on that.
It's true. I mean, I say that even with these three mothers, but I also speak about it in my husband's story as well, that even if we look at, let's say, Malcolm X, MLK Jr., and James Baldwin, we've heard stories about their fathers, whether they were the present father, like MLK Sr. was, or an abusive stepfather, like James Baldwin was. And instead of telling a story around James Baldwin that includes the mother, who was very supportive, very loving, very accepting of her son, who not only encourages him to be a writer, but is passing on her skill to him. We had studied throughout history more about the man who hurt James Baldwin, who did not want him to write, who kind of stood in his way. So we have so much more of a curiosity around the men who have inspired us, or the men who have been important in our formation. And I didn't write this book to replace those stories, but to have us question, why do we care so much about them? Whether that figure is present or not, whether that figure is positive or not, that figure is going to get attention. Why are we not doing the same for mothers?
I think in today's culture, to need attention, obviously, to make money, or capitalism is a machine that is never full. And you look at, like, even in podcasts, true crime is almost always at the top, and which I don't want to shame anyone for their true love of true crime. Like, I get it. It's interesting. And whenever my wife's watching Law and Order, like, I cannot be in the room. I have to stop whatever I'm doing. I'm like, this is interesting.
Yeah.
It's not the world's best show, but it's like
catches your attention.
Yeah, I got to figure this out, and maybe because it scares us, I'm not sure why, but that's true. I think so. Again, and this probably gonna be the last time I sort of bring it back around, but my dad was an addict. He died homeless, in Sacramento. And I did get to see him a few times before he passed away. I was 9 years old.
Wow.
But that, I think, is a more interesting and shocking story than my mom, who stopped doing. She wasn't an addict, but she stopped drinking completely when he died, just because she knew she was all I had.
Yeah.
And her long obedience in the same direction, for me, is incredibly more formative than my dad's addiction. And he was a wonderful person, but he had a really horrible addiction. But I'm trying to think, even when we talk about it right now, and we should talk just a little bit. It's those who don't know your husband, Michael Tubbs. He was the youngest mayor of a city, I believe, ever.
Yeah, the youngest mayor of a major American city in U.S. history. Yeah.
He was like 26 when he became mayor of Stockton. And you both still work together on a number of initiatives, ending poverty and a whole bunch of other really important topics. But going back to kind of what makes a story interesting, what gets people's attention, why are we so much more interested in that?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's interesting because when I was doing my research, and then I'll relate it back to with my husband and Michael's story, I found that the sons actually gave a lot of credit to their mothers. And if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, even James Baldwin says, ask my mother. She's the expert. He writes it into a lot of his stories. He gives her that credit. MLK Jr. talked about how his dear mother was an inspiration for him, and he checked in with her all the time, and she would give him advice. And we know that Malcolm X, at the very end of the autobiography that Alex Haley wrote, it's in the epilogue, so a lot of people don't read this part, but he talks about how when his mother had been taken from him, he was a kid. And so there's a lot of context to that story, but his mother was put in an institution against her will because she was a radical activist. And someone said, and a doctor wrote, that she was imagining being discriminated against, and that this was enough to lock her away, basically. So she interpreted this experience as an imprisonment. And Malcolm was very young at the time, but it took him later realizing, when she was finally released after 25 years of her life, he realized that everything that he had been fighting against, that this was just another symptom of white supremacy, that his mother had been taken from him, and how she was the most formative person in his life who taught him first and foremost about Pan-Africanism, who taught him about Black independence. And he writes this in letters. So all that to say, the sons actually were giving credit where it was due, but it was the historians, the scholars, who, when they heard those stories or heard the sons say these things, they didn't believe that that fit their narrative of how men become great men. And so they kind of left it out of the record. They kind of buried that. So here's an example where I can apply that to my life, or thinking about my husband and his work. Yes, my husband has had an incredible career. He's continuing to build an incredible career with such incredible impact. And as we talked about, you know, being the youngest mayor of a major city. And so he had a lot of attention on him. And we've been together since we were in college. We're college sweethearts. And so his first campaign for city council, I was 19, he was 21.
Wow.
And we were still college students. But there was a documentary being made about his first campaign. There was another one that was made about his mayoral campaign. And Michael, every time he was interviewed for anything, he would always talk about his three mothers who raised him. So his mom, of course, my incredible mom-in-law, his grandmother, and his auntie, Tasha. And he would always give credit to them. And then, of course, as our relationship progresses and we're married, he starts to also give credit to me and his wife. So he's like, these powerful Black women in my life. I've heard the interviews. I see him get interviewed. And then I see what comes out later in the article or even in the documentaries. And despite how much attention he gives us, the person who reinterprets the story then puts men at the center of the story. And then we become these little footnotes. And so much, even if you look at just word count or time on the screen or those minutes, the father in his life who sadly wasn't able to be there for him, and we can talk all about policies that lead to the horrible mass incarceration of people of color, especially men of color, but he wasn't able to be here in his life. He received so much more attention, no matter how much my husband would say, it's these women who have helped me become who I am today. So when I see it on a personal level, but then I also saw it in what I was studying, it becomes very obvious to me that the storytellers have a huge role to play in either maintaining what they believe to be true about how we all become great people, that it's about patriarchy or maintaining the image of patriarchy, or we have the power to dismantle that. Even in the stories that we tell, we can listen more deeply and more consciously to who people are actually giving credit to. Because there's some people who after this interview might still say in the summary that Marlon talked about his father, even though you told us in a sentence about the contributions of your mother. And so we all have to be better listeners, but storytellers have to be incredibly conscious of what they are reproducing and what they are normalizing in the stories that they tell.
That's very interesting. I'm not sure any of us think about it very often. I kept going back to, in my mind, what if I didn't talk? My mom's still, she's going to hear this.
Yeah.
Like, of course I'm not going to.
He gave you credit, Mama.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not trying to do that. You know, one thing I kept going back and forth in my absolutely negative view of the world and defensive pessimism as I was reading your book. And actually, I thought about this because I actually started, and this is not to say, I think everyone should read both these books.
Thank you.
And
I agree.
Yeah. And even with somewhat of what I thought was a cursory knowledge, of some of the struggles and some of the things that have happened over the years and what that was like, what it was like to be in the one drop rule in World War II in the military. My grandfather would tell me about that and the troops and what they would get versus the white troops and all of that. But I probably knew 5 to 10, maybe 10% of what the patriarchy does.
Yeah.
And I'm in this weird situation. Most people just think I'm white. So I get to hear all kinds of gross stuff.
Oh, no.
So, in a way that's like, I'm not signing off on it, but it's just sort of like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
I keep, when I was reading your book, though, Erased, I was thinking, how much of this is greed? Because you think about, okay, people make money by, even when they put out a story, they want people to read it. They want people to be somewhat comfortable or used to what they're going to read.
Yeah, interesting.
And, I don't think men even read books anymore, honestly. I think they just listen to like Rogan or something.
Oh,
but
no.
if you do, and you do go into reading this book, first of all, it was emotional. It was sad. It was true, and it was necessary.
Thank you.
And I think it literally changed me.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. I kept thinking, and I kept finding myself even maybe being a patriarchy. I don't know. Maybe this is why. But I was like, how much of this is like, this isn't any better.
Yeah.
But how much of it is just like gross greed and like power hungriness? But like, there were a few points when I was like, yeah, it seems, Anna, it seems like you're giving these guys a lot of credit sometimes. It's like I've met some of them, and I'm sure you have too. And I mean, the thought that this is so strategic, you point out, and I mean, I know both your parents were attorneys, is that correct?
Yes.
The book is written to me like a case that you've won.
Thank you.
I feel like
yes.
I feel like you use personal examples, you use history.
Thank you.
There's not really much of, there's your opinion, but it's kind of like based on the facts that you just presented.
Thank you.
As I was going through it, I kept wanting to find another reason than just like well thought out, horrible racism. And I think there are probably just norms and things. How much of it is, I'm going to answer my own question because you wrote this book, and I won't get it. You wrote this book, and I don't want to forget to say this, The Three Mothers, and it sold well.
Thank you.
It did really well. So I also thought like, okay, even the greediest of people, could have maybe made some money or done something, if they would have just brought up what seems obvious to us all once we see it.
Well, that's the thing. And we see that over and over again with, claims that people don't want to see women as the main characters of movies, or like they don't want to see people of color. Like for years and years in Hollywood and in book publishing, it was like, we need to keep this in the style of the hegemony to get very social sciencey about it. Because that's what sells. That's not true. We've actually proven that over and over again, that when you put women in the center and make them the main characters, we see just as many sales, if not more. People want to see themselves represented. And if we think very specifically about the buying power of Black women, it's one of the strongest in our nation. And so
that's a good point. We
have to pay closer attention to that. And we often would think that there's some sort of like economic logic to racism or sexism, and that's not true. Our research has shown us that it's hurting all of us when we don't allow every citizen to reach their full potential. There's nothing logical about it. It doesn't help us to have students of color not have access to the same opportunities as everybody else. Racism and sexism have cost our nation money. And so we have to stop trying to find sort of what's the logic behind it? Why are they doing it? No, there's many people have been taught that they are more human than other human beings, that they are more valuable than other human beings, that they are somehow separate and different than other human beings. And so much of what you're alluding to in the book is the argument that I make around how patriarchy exists all over the world, but each patriarchy in each nation is unique to the context of that nation. Yeah. And you can't dismantle any patriarchal system unless you understand the specifics of the context that it finds itself in. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying anything about whether American patriarchy is worse than other patriarchies. I'm not trying to make a hierarchy of patriarchies around the world. I'm saying we have to specifically understand American patriarchy. And the American part of it is that, yes, there's this flawed gender binary that says men are supposed to control women, that men are the dominant ones, and that women are solely supposed to reproduce men's power, and that's the role that they're supposed to play, and that one of the ways in which you reproduce that power is obviously through children and the passing of legacy and the passing of property, etc. But the Americanness of that is throughout our history, we've seen that not everybody is even given access to that already problematic binary. Many people have been kept away even from that access. So what's going on there? If we've told Black women in America, and if we think about times of slavery, that their children were always going to inherit the status of their mother. When we were told that to be man in America was you hold the status for your family. But a Black woman in America was always going to pass on that status to her child. So that's one example of saying not everybody has access to the binary, the gender binary in the United States. And so that has been playing the role of dehumanization in our country's history. Since the founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence and wrote the Constitution, they have been telling all of us to fight for our right to be a part of an already problematic gender binary that only really is considering white men and white women. And so this is where we have to kind of unify our efforts against patriarchy. It is true that white women have been subjugated by American patriarchy because they've been told, reproduce the power of great white men. But it's also true that people of color have not even been given access to that patriarchy. And so those fights are unified, but they are different from each other. And thus far, so many of our feminist fights have centered solely the experience of man versus woman, and not how do we access humanity when we've been removed from the gender binary.
How do you even become part of the unfair society that is the patriarchy?
And the positive thing about that is that if we have already been removed from it, we can build something completely different. So if you were not included in it, we have to get off this kind of ladder of my road to being treated as a human being is to assimilate to white men and white women. But that's the cycle that we've actually seen historically, is those who start to believe that is how I become human in the U.S. I assimilate to them. I fight for power. I fight to dominate others. I fight for opportunities because there's scarcity and only so many of us are going to be able to make it. That's not the goal. The goal is actually for power to be in the hands of all of us. That's the definition of democracy. That's what we all have said we're fighting for, not so that we can fight to have power over another person. And so that's been the trick of American patriarchy. We've been taught to assimilate to it. But when we do that, all we do is protect a social order that doesn't benefit any of us.
You're allowing us the opportunity to be more creative.
Yes.
And to work outside of what we see every day. I don't think as humans we're very good at doing what we're not used to.
It's true.
When you're talking about the storytellers who are replicating this narrative, do you think that they are even aware that they're doing it?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think there are and I say it a little bit in the book. I refer to some groups of people as American patriarchs. And those are the people who are, through their actions, through their thoughts, protecting that hierarchy that I described. And some patriarchs are doing it very consciously because they want that social order. They want to be in charge, or they even want to protect the access. Let's think about white women for a second who vote for President Donald Trump. They know to a certain extent that they have a different role to play than the men in their lives, but they have now kind of found some honor in that they get to protect the social order. They get to reproduce it. That's the role that they play. So when we're seeing, all of this celebration of trad wives and like all the stuff that's like a return to domesticity, there's a way in which many white women are coping with the fact that they fully believe that they're not supposed to have the same access to freedoms and rights as their male counterparts. And so they're protecting it very consciously. There's then those who have just been taught this script. All of us have been taught the script since we were born.
Right.
And then who just feel it's so natural and it's meant to be this way that they don't even understand the crafting of American patriarchy. It's all fabricated. And so they then just go along with it. And they feel that they have to protect it because they really fear what happens without it. They see their own humanity tied to it. That's how they make sense of the world. So if we don't have that, what do we have, right? If we have it, this is especially obvious in attacks against trans people and trans communities. And for many folks, there's so much, at least for me, you feel kind of like, why are people so obsessed with alienating trans people? But if you understand, again, that the path to freedom that we've been sold in the United States is through a gender binary, then the regular person who is really just trying to make sense of their own world feels very fearful of anything that disrupts that. Because we've been told that that's how we know to exist. The gender binary, that's what tells us everything. When you're pregnant with a child, the first thing everyone will ask you is, what are you having? Is this a boy or a girl? We need to know immediately. That's the way we make sense of things. And so I really encourage those who are a little bit less conscious of how they're protecting a system that doesn't serve them to even walk through world history. American patriarchy is not the first way in which human beings organize themselves. We have come up with different ways to organize ourselves society by society. And the first people who inhabited lands in this country had a variety of ways of organizing themselves. And many indigenous tribes felt that there were more genders, that there were so many different ways to think about our identities. And that was purposely destroyed, attacked, erased, so that we would then believe this is just how things have always operated. That's an illusion. And for some people, that's really scary to suddenly be told everything you've ever been taught is an illusion. That's alarming.
A social construct, yes.
That's really alarming. It's like, no, I don't want to go there. Like,
Nobody
I'm
wants to
gonna
wake
protect.
up from a matrix.
Exactly.
Like find yourself in a pot of slime. And
Exactly. But there are many people who, because they were, again, never included in that social order, and that's what one of the goals of this book is helping people realize most of us, if not all of us, don't fit neatly into that forced, rigid social order. And so it actually gives us so much freedom. There are so many other ways to do this. And we can start to really think about this experiment that is American democracy in a new and exciting way. And it shouldn't cause us so much fear and discomfort. But people can't go on that journey until they've walked through. The way I write the book is very I don't want to say strategic because that feels like it has some kind of negative connotation, but just very intentional. I walk us through the story that is American patriarchy. It's just a belief. It's an opinion to say white men should have power. That's just someone's thought, an opinion that then became systematized when you write laws that make that story seem true and that punishes those who don't believe that story and who don't follow that story, and that erases other stories. If you know the fabrication of it, then you feel so much more able to build something else.
It's scary to think that way. When I was reading the part of your book where you talk about how, I think one of the quotes that I had read was, the first step in dismantling American patriarchy is understanding that we are told simply a story that's passed on to us by those in power who aim to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed like a very succinct way to say it. And it seems like almost human nature. Like if you have power, it's like, oh, what would it be like if I didn't? Which in some ways is kind of ironic because, I don't want to make fun of anyone, but, we think that a lot of times in America, we want to get enough money to retire early or just relax and hang out. But then when you see the paternal patriarch on steroids that is our current, environment that we're in, you see someone that's the richest man in the world, but just being on Twitter wasn't enough.
Right.
He had to buy it.
Yeah.
Or just doing business in America wasn't enough.
Yeah.
He had to buy it.
Yeah.
And talk about, okay, I don't know how much longer, anyone has left on this earth, but I know it's not forever.
Yeah.
And I know that's about what it would take to spend $300 billion.
Right.
So at what point do we admit that it's not about money?
And that it's more about control.
And then to take it a step further, how scared do you have to be to always need to be influencing or controlling someone else? I have the feeling that some leaders are so terrified inside.
Yeah.
And if you look at their lives, you can see how they got there.
Fear,
it's not a mystery.
Yeah.
I don't think our president or Elon had any kind of charmed childhood.
Right.
It sounded like horrific.
Yeah.
So if I don't want to be that scared again, then I have to be in control.
Yeah. That's a really great point. I talk in the book a little bit about trauma and how trauma in combination with American patriarchy is a really dangerous thing because depending again on what you've been told from the moment you were born about your position in the world, if you're told, I'm supposed to dominate, I'm supposed to control people, that's what I'm supposed to do, versus someone who's told, care about others and you're connected to others and what you do will impact the people around you and the community around you. If you experience trauma, your reaction to that trauma is going to be very different depending on where you were told you fall in the world. So those who are told, I'm supposed to have power, but they experience something that makes them feel powerless.
Yes.
They are going to exert that power to an extreme level, as opposed to those who have been told, I'm connected to others. If they experience trauma, we often see that they're going to try to find a way to take that pain and create something good with it, despite what they've been through.
Yeah.
And
those are the best. Those are the best kind of people. I think that's the best kind of life, and so inspiring when you see someone who's been through so much, but maybe understood some things about life, and you have to be sort of tough or have good boundaries, or but if the ends justify the means, the ends being loving people, knowing people, experiencing life as much as possible, valuing other human beings above everything else we have here. Nothing else is even close to as valuable.
Exactly. And I talk about in the book that the opposite of American patriarchy is not that women have power over men. That's not the opposite. The opposite is we each have power in ourselves to make choices about ourselves, to live in a country where our vote counts. Each of our vote counts. It's not let's turn the tables and subjugate men and take away their rights and power. No. It's men, especially white, rich men, stop trying to take control of everyone. Leave us alone. And we do have to coexist in a nation, right? There still has to be something organized, right? We still have to have candidates and be able to voice our opinions. And we're going to experiment. We're going to be shifting and testing out different leaders. That's a part of living in a nation together. I'm not necessarily advocating yet for completely dismantling that. I mean, we have to take everything step by step. But I am saying, think about the ways in which power has been taken from you as an individual, and you've been told that you, in order to be someone who matters in the world, that like your journey in life is how many people can you hold power over versus can you find power in yourself? And depending again on where you've been put on the hierarchy of American patriarchy and the rules and the story of American patriarchy, you're either somebody who says, let me continue to build that power and it's never going to stop until the day that I die. And you also see those type of men constantly reproducing. They want as many children as possible because it's a part of how they're going to continue their control even when they're no longer alive.
That makes sense,
This is why he loves having so many children. Then you think of those who, again, power is removed from us constantly, and everyone's just sitting there trying to figure out, like, why? Why can't I even hear myself think anymore? Why can't I access my own intuition? If I think about the experience of motherhood in the United States, it's a constant of telling women, you don't know what you're doing. We're all going to tell you what to do.
There's a lot of money there.
A lot of money there.
To convince you don't know.
Because you can really capitalize on people's vulnerabilities.
People have been, I say this a lot, but I feel like everyone around me is slowly becoming content instead of people. And it's just a reflection or a reaction to what they just saw. And it's lonely.
Oh, we have a lonely, what is it? The loneliness
epidemic.
Yeah.
We've been talking about that quite a bit. I honestly feel like this is a conversation that I would want to have for like 2 or 3 more days. But I have in here like all these highlights and exclamation points in my notes from Erased, and I want to talk about the Iroquois Confederacy and how that is a matriarchal society or more egalitarian society that you gave a great example of. You talk about Sacagawea, which you confirmed most of our suspicions, because even in school when I learned about Sacagawea, I was like, she doesn't want to do this.
This doesn't make sense.
I don't know if any,
but that's probably because of what your family taught you. Like, that wasn't because of your like formal education that you had that suspicion. I'm going to give your mom credit again. I don't even know. But someone must have told you, like, that's not how Native women have been treated in our country.
I just didn't see any women or girls in my life that would, like, were trying to, like, hang out with 2 crusty old explorers. And like, I was just like, I honestly said, like, confirmed all of our suspicions. Thank you. I have you here. We could talk about any of this very important and high-minded stuff, but I want to talk a little bit about hip hop.
Oh, okay. Yes.
All right.
I didn't know we were going
culture.
there. Exciting.
Yeah, because when I was reading through chapter 3, and you bring up Mount Rushmore, maybe the best example of patriarchy.
There's a lot of good examples of patriarchy, sadly.
I don't know if there's a larger one. Like physically. There's not a mountain of white men. And I think I was like reading it, and then I thought about one of my favorite groups currently, Mount Westmore.
I actually don't know Mount
It's a super
Westmore.
group
Okay.
with my favorite rapper from the Bay Area, which we are in today. We're in San Francisco recording this. And he's from Vallejo, so I don't want to make the mistake of saying he's from San Francisco. But E40, Too Short, we have Ice Cube, and Snoop Dogg.
Wow. Since when did this become a thing?
It was like a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Wow, I'm behind. That's
Mount
cool.
Westmore.
Love that for them.
I think it's perfect. I think I'm the demo. You know, I'm like mid-40s. like they all kind of have the same dad bod that I do, except for Snoop, he's just always been tiny. Eats whatever he wants, I guess. And but yeah,
That's so funny.
Yeah, it just made me think of that. But where are you? Because hip hop culture, you think of someone like all those people in that group, really, but Too Short is a great example. Not to hate on Too Short, but also from Babes from Oakland. I don't like the message. If I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her to listen. I love the music.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But you are the perfect, in my opinion, person to ask. Cool, knowledgeable, a woman.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And you have all the experiences that I don't have and can't answer that question. Where do you stand on
like what's going on with hip hop?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a really good question.
Yeah.
And I expected, I mean, this is one of my first interviews around my new book. So it's like cool for me to think through what are other questions going to be from, audiences as I go on this tour. But I knew as I started writing this book, hip hop was going to be a question because we know it's extremely, not all hip hop, but obviously there's many examples that we can point to of speaking about women in horrific ways, normalizing violence against women.
Pretty homophobic still, too.
Very homophobic. But there's also a side of hip hop that's about shifting the way we think of our role in society. So there's a lot of examples and potential in hip hop of fighting against American patriarchy. I will say that.
Totally. That's what's so confusing.
So I'll put that side out there before I dive into the patriarchal side.
Okay.
Because hip hop is also revolutionary. It's also chain breaking. It's also let's completely flip this on its head and build something different because we've been pushed out of the hegemony again. We've been pushed out of that power. So how do we reclaim power? So I will put that there.
I think they did and still do.
In beautiful ways.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So important, especially when we're thinking about female rappers and the ways in which they're like, F this, I'm going to do me. And that's inspiring always. So that side put that one to the side for a second. The part I talked about earlier around how a lot of people have been taught to assimilate to American patriarchy in order to find freedom, in order to find power. We sadly see a lot of that in hip hop, where if we look to the particular example of, and I don't want to say this as if Black men are a monolith in any ways. It's an incredibly diverse group of experiences and people and backgrounds. But if we think about Black men who are violent towards women of color, who try to remove the power of women of color, who try to subject them, it's often because they've been fooled into thinking that to gain their humanity, to be treated as human beings in the U.S., they have to play their role in American patriarchy. They have to assert their manhood. And if we go back to what manhood means, what we talked about at the beginning, which is control over others, dominance over others, having power, they have been fooled in many ways into thinking that the reason they don't have access to humanity is because they're not controlling their women enough. And so we see even throughout American history all these stereotypes and tropes used to blame the Black woman, to blame her somehow for emasculating her men or man or the sons in her life or brother, all of it, to blame them, Black women, for the social ills that our community has faced on a larger scale. And all of that is strategic to keep those who don't actually have access to the benefits of American patriarchy from questioning that structure and instead put that structure on a pedestal that they're aspiring to. And so, in my opinion, that's sadly why you see a lot of violence against women on behalf of Black men. And it's something that we really do have to call out, because if those men, I think, became more conscious of the fact that they are also just pawns in upholding something that doesn't serve them, we would see more of what Bell Hooks calls revolutionary manhood. And
tell us about that.
Yeah, Bell Hooks talks about this in her book, We Real Cool. And she reminds her readers to think more about the examples of Black relationships in American history that have always kind of flown in the face. And she doesn't use the word American patriarchy, but I am defining what a lot of us have kind of defined as the structure of America as American patriarchy. That we've always seen examples of Black people claiming something different in the United States, who have created something different, who, despite what they were told, that we were not human, that our children were not human, have said, of course we're human, of course our children are the most precious beings. We've created something new, because we've always had to do that in America. Black people, for the large part and the most part, have not been able to just say, I accept this way of living, because that means I am not human. So that's where you find so much inspiration throughout our nation's history of pushing our country to be better, are those visionaries who were not included in the rigidity of American patriarchy. They were always creating something new. They were building other paths. They were getting other people to start seeing things through their eyes. Like, that was the revolutionary part of it. And that was men, women, people coming together and creating something that did not replicate this hierarchy of oppression. And she says that Black men, many of them, were tricked into thinking that they were not being given access to humanity because they weren't good enough at playing the role of man. And so they start to try to remove power from the women around them in order to prove, I am a man. I dominate. I control.
And there are very few places to dominate other than that.
Exactly. There's not many other
without getting killed.
Spaces. Yeah. And that there would be, maybe some kind of reward for getting their families in line and getting, you can actually see there's such a rise of podcasters and like content creators who are talking about, you do have to control the women in your life. That's how you become a man. And then they start to use Christianity as kind of like, this is a divine way of protecting the family. Like, you start to see such a replication, and they don't realize that they're just assimilating to something that actually will never fully include them. How
glad are we that, in me personally, and that the men in these lives didn't control these women?
This is interesting because as much as
what if my dad controlled my mom? She was all I had. He wasn't there. And that, is not going to make any kind of blanket statements.
And it's not necessarily, this is the thing when we're talking about the attack on the Black family structure in the U.S., it's almost never because an individual doesn't want to be present for their family. It's because of societal ills and attacks directly on the Black family. And I talk about this in the book as well, this notion of the nuclear family in American patriarchy, that we've even seen, policies that are all about protecting the nuclear family, that there must be a dad and a mom and their children.
And they have to be totally isolated and self-sufficient
and do their own thing. They're not a part of their extended communities.
Don't take walks. Don't have meals together.
It's true. But if we think about that, it's actually also only ever really fully been available to white families. So the nuclear family structure that even, again, we're thinking about times of slavery, slaves wanted to have nuclear families. They wanted to marry. They wanted to keep their children. That was attacked from the very beginning.
Because they would be separated.
They would be disrespected. Black men were not allowed to protect their wives.
No, they weren't.
And Black women were not seen nor represented as the same fragile, innocent women in the same way that white women were. This is another example of how the gender definition did not include us. And so this is also why, again, Bell Hooks talks about, let's make this revolutionary, though. We can have our families, we can have our relationships, and we don't have to replicate systems of oppression. They don't have to look that way in order for them to be considered family. In order for you to be considered man, you don't have to be violent towards women. There's another option. There's many other options. You can work side by side. You can say, hey, system that never actually included me, I'm not going to sit here begging to be a part of you. I'm going to do something different.
Power, efficacy, and you make the point, recognition is something that we need, it's like a human need. And I constantly am seeing people in the wrong way and by hurting others try to get those things.
Yeah. But again, if you are not aware of it, and from the beginning you've been told that the standard is, hey, boys and men, in order for you to be human and have access to opportunities, you have to provide. You have to be the protector. You have to be strong. You can't show emotions. And you need to put your foot down because you're the protector, right? Like,
two emotions, angry and fine.
And that's it. That's it. And that is where we see the example of how not only for Black men, but all men, they are also being hurt by American patriarchy. And so I have a whole chapter in there about how white men, even those with power and money, are also being hurt by American patriarchy.
Two things I want to get to, and that is I wanted to finish what I was saying about my dad, because I want to make sure that you brought up a good point, that it's not necessarily, he didn't wake up one day and think, I can't wait to be, an addict.
Right.
He went through an incredible amount of being ostracized. He was a great-looking, light black man with blue eyes and a fro. And, he would get called the N-word, especially living in Sacramento. We have stories of being at the fair and, different places where he was trying to get us a souvenir or something. It ended in something that was violent. And so seeing that and knowing that even as he grew up, like, girls liked him, like even white girls liked him, but the white boys did not like that, of course. That was a threat to them. But he wasn't ever Black enough to hang out, with. So there's so much here.
Yeah.
But I just kind of wanted to make the point that in talking about him, I want to make sure I honor that he did try his best with what he had. He had a lot working against him, and he was in and out of jail.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, I think, and I hope for any listeners, especially Black men who are listening, oftentimes you don't know that you're coming up against a whole system that benefits when you play your part to protect it. You don't benefit. The system does. And so when you become more aware of that and you realize, wait a second, that's not something that I want to be a part of, and you can build something else, do that with that consciousness.
Thank you for inviting us into a different and more creative moment, reality. I think it's so hopeful. I think that you have to get through some of what's in both of these books in order to really fully understand what you're up against.
Yeah.
Especially because not people holding the system up usually don't know they are. I think there's a few strategic psychopaths doing it.
Totally.
Probably,
I think a lot more of it's subconscious.
Yeah. And subconscious. And they want to be accepted and they want to be part of, like, the system sucks, but I don't want to be like a nerd, and that's the lightest, most jokey way to put it. I understand it's not nothing like that. But lastly, I wanted to give you a chance to share a little bit about your own mother.
Yeah.
And how that relationship has impacted your life.
Thank you so much. So my mom passed away 2 years ago.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. But she was the greatest influence in my life. Obviously, I always, like we talked about at the very beginning, so it's a good full circle question. Everything that she did and what she advocated for and what she believed in, even before I was fully conscious of that, was influencing my decisions, but also the ways in which she told me I could do whatever I wanted to do, that she was going to work hard to make sure that I had access to opportunities, that others would maybe try to get in my way, but that I shouldn't let that affect me. You know, she was just always so powerful, so strong.
Prepared you for some of those challenges.
Yeah. And she didn't hide us from it, but was just very like, F that, you know, it's not gonna stop you, because you're gonna come up against people who don't believe that you can do it, and you can. And so
I think you did.
Thank you so much. When The Three Mothers became a bestseller, that was about, if I'm remembering correctly, like 2 weeks after my mom passed away. And it's a little bit of a blur. It might have been I think it was around those 2 weeks.
We're not going to fact check it. Yeah, how did it feel?
I remember just thinking like this. Of course, I immediately wanted to tell her.
Yeah.
But then I remember thinking she knew. She knew that the things that I wanted to accomplish, I would. She was always that person. She was never surprised. And it wasn't as if like I would go to her and be like, Mom, look at this. And that she would be like, okay. It was more that she would say, yeah. And
she knew it before you did.
Exactly. And not that those things are the things that like you know, like live life for. It's not all for the credits and all those things. But she knew how much it mattered to me for these women's names to be known. And she never doubted it. There was never a doubt that I could do the things that I wanted to do. And so she's always with me. And this book, Erased, she would have loved this book. And the whole time said, yes, that's what I've been saying since you were a little girl, or, you know, like, this is what I've always believed about the world. And and she co-wrote it with me. You know, like, what I believe about how I see the world is 90% informed by the fact that I was raised by Nancy. And so for me, none of this is like, none of it is like this like mind-blowing thing that I'm doing. It's just like, oh, let me just explain to you all what I've always known because this woman raised me.
That's incredible.
Oh, shout out to Nancy.
Yeah.
We want to give her credit, and at some point we need maybe that book.
Yeah.
That's a book that I think that people are going to want to read at some point too.
Yeah. That's what, you know, it's interesting though. I am one of 3 of her children. And I even know this from writing The Three Mothers, that we all have different experiences with our moms, right? And our parents. And it's a story that is one I would love to tell, but it's not only my story and not only my relationship with her. And so it's something that I would want to do with my siblings.
I love that.
But yeah, and I mean, we're very close, my brother, sister, and I. And we disagree about a lot of things. We were raised by 2 lawyers. So it's like, you know, we come with our different arguments to the table. And that's why I'm always ready. You know, I'll come up with an argument, but I know I have to have the receipts. And so I think it would be an interesting experiment to see how we could write that together with our different backgrounds and knowledge about our mom, and even stories that she told us differently.
I can't wait for people to get to know you more and read Erased and have so much more of a thought out than I ever thought possible version of what is a patriarchy, what does it do, what is it doing to us, and how are we playing a role in it without knowing. Just not knowing I was playing more of a role than I wanted to.
Right.
So, and like I said, I thought I did know. So anyone who thinks they know, you don't know. You don't know. And it, you know, I thought of you writing the book. I thought, did you get sad at least some of the sad things, and happy at some, you know? That's
a good question. With Three Mothers, I experienced so much of an emotional roller coaster with that book because I was already writing it, but then I was expecting my firstborn. Yeah. So I was pregnant while writing this book, and some of the atrocities that I write about, you know, I'm talking about Black women who lived through the 1900s. And so, of course, there's going to be some harder things to talk about. And I would feel him kicking inside of me while I'm, you know, doing this kind of research. It's intense, but it's also a reminder of how important this work is. And so anytime I'm on an emotional roller coaster with a book, I know I'm doing what needs to be done. And with Erased, yeah, there's some hard things that we talk about on this journey, because the human experience is sometimes really hard. But
Often.
yeah, every day.
Yeah, you're being really nice about it now.
But it's also really beautiful.
It is.
And I am so grateful that I get to connect with people through my stories. And that's why I'm so vulnerable in my writing, is because I am asking my reader to be vulnerable too.
Mm-hmm.
And to even share of themselves. And once they pick up that book, a book has a life of its own once it's out there, you know, and at any given moment, someone is holding the words that I put out there and going on a journey with them. And I want to be as honest and authentic and as vulnerable as possible and walk through those harder parts of our human experience with them. And hopefully so that we come out on the other side of that book less afraid of each other, less afraid of all of our potential, feeling more creative than we ever have, feeling more hopeful than we ever have, because we've stared that harder part and that darker and painful part in the face, and we can see it for what it is. We haven't avoided it. We haven't strayed from it. We've looked at it together, and we can now ask, what are we going to do differently?
For anyone who's listening to this and they're sort of considering getting off of the modern, fast-paced information fire hose that is our life, or, you know, constant phone or social media, whatever it is that is turning us into content and reactions to other people's thoughts versus having our own. This book, for me, is a great way to sit down with a book. So the medium is the message. I mean, it's static. It doesn't change. You know what you're reading, and you can put it down if you need to for a second, pick it back up.
Yeah.
But to anyone who wants to not hear a word like patriarchy or racism and get triggered by something someone else told you it was, and you would like to actually find out what these things are. If someone says systemic racism and you're like, no, I can't do that. You know, I can't do too much of an accent.
I loved it.
But yeah, thanks. It's going easy. But because that scares me. Or those words, they're trying to teach our kids this and that.
Right.
Read some source material.
Yeah.
And have some humility. And you know what? There's so much joy and peace and understanding in the humility that comes from understanding what really happened and what could happen again if you don't pick it up and read about it.
I mean, fear is such an important thing to talk about. It's very strategic for people to be taught to be fearful of the thing that will help them.
That's the quote of the podcast.
There we go.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
It's
Thank
incredible.
you both so much
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Welcome to Marlon Helps, or at least tries. The question this week is, there's kind of two questions, but I wanted to start with, Marlon, can you define what vulnerability is to you?
Oh, man. I hope people appreciate this because this feels vulnerable. What does vulnerability mean to me? I think the first thing that comes to mind is being authentic, even when it feels weak. I think the most vulnerable people, when you choose to be vulnerable, it actually ends up being really liberating and freeing. And I think there's also certain situations where maybe it's not the best case scenario because people will take advantage of it. So as far as what it means, I think it just means being absolutely honest about things that people don't talk about much.
That makes sense. It is one of those things that's just so hard to define, I feel like. It's so much more of a feeling. So, what is the importance of vulnerability in relationships and really just in general?
Well, it depends on the relationship. If it's a frenemies type situation, is that still a cool word to use? Frenemies?
Yeah, totally.
All right.
I shouldn't have answered. I'm also 100 years old. Hannah, is that cool?
Hannah, between us both, we're close to 90 years old.
That's terrible.
Oh, I mean, that's terrible. I liked it.
Yeah, that's cool.
I think frenemy, I mean, I don't really hear that, but I don't know what another word would even be. So I think it's cool.
Even just like someone who you don't feel safe around, or,
Yeah.
I think that kind of relationship, not always the best move. But if you found someone who's committed to being honest and like walking through life with you and seeing you as a person before seeing your beliefs, I have friends that I've been able to hold on to, and it hasn't always been easy, but we have very different sets of beliefs. But we both uh, have committed to, no matter what video you just watched on whatever news station or whatever you think about the importance of, spirituality in life, or, i- you know, you can have any opinion, but first I'm going to see and reflect your value as a human being. And I think the only way you can do that is to be honest and vulnerable. There's strength in that. And it strengthens your relationship.
You talk so much about how important it is, like connection, right? Building real, authentic connections. And it seems like the way to do that is by practicing being vulnerable with the people around you. But if you are somebody who feels like they can't do that, it comes really like, or you're somebody, you've got these relationships with people that you're not that way with and you want to get there, it feels really hard to just suddenly start opening up.
Yeah.
So what's the first step to that?
It feels like it's mortifying to start that, or to be the first one. I think to be known and not know if you're going to be loved still, I think that's most people's biggest fear. And it makes sense that you'd be scared about that. I think allowing us all, a little bit of validation and self love, even to even get to that point. You don't have to shout it from the mountaintops. I think for me, kind of where I'm at currently is, if we do an episode of this show and I'm not at least a little bit embarrassed, then I probably was just trying to make myself look good the whole time. So I think, and not really modeling the humility that actually I think is going to be helpful for people. So for me, I've decided that's kind of, you know, a goal. It's not like I want to punish, myself, but at the same time, like, pride is real, and nobody really wants to be like made fun of or controlled, and vulnerability can lead to both those things. So being thoughtful about who you choose, finding a person that, and you can have the conversation with. Even when I was getting to know my wife, I think the moment when I knew that I think I want to marry this person was actually, we were talking, we were on a walk. And, when you're getting to know somebody, especially when there's that much at stake, uh, it's super scary to be vulnerable. Cause like, what if you do love them and they don't love you back, or they don't want the same thing you do? But it weirdly connected, because she said something like, I'm not totally happy with where I am as a person, like as a human being, and my like personal growth. But for the rest of my life, I want to try to get better and improve.
That rules. That's so good.
It did.
Yeah.
It did rule.
Yeah.
It was like, I think, I hadn't heard anyone I was dating ever say that. And it made me feel safe. It was vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she admitted, like, I don't have it all together. And it sort of just came naturally, I think, to her, which was another cool thing. I was like, whoa, I don't want to lose this person. This is someone that we can get better together.
I spent maybe like an hour talking with your wife at the conference this year, and she immediately it was clear that she's like one of the coolest people. What's her deal? Like, how does she do it? That's my follow-up question. What is she doing that the rest of us aren't?
We got to have her on. I don't know.
That's a great idea.
She's like, some people like learn how to be cool and relatable, or like do it for their own gain, of which I've been guilty of a number of times.
It's so normal.
Yeah. But she doesn't. it's almost like it's the only way she knows how to be. I can't
Mhm.
explain it. I just know that I don't have it and that I'm very attracted to it.
I mean, I feel like I don't know many people who do have it. It's a remarkable thing when people do.
She's not perfect, but it's just a lot of things she's not like a schemer, or she just kind of like loves people. She's a special ed teacher.
Mhm.
She loves her job. The kids all, I think, feel it immediately. And she's always talking very lovingly about them, and that's sort of a selfless thing.
Mhm.
And I don't know.
I think you and your wife both model vulnerability.
Hmm.
And I think it's really special. And I hope that people can learn from your advice of what it looks like, how to get there, and push through the uncomfortable feelings that can and might and probably will come up, especially if it's something that is new. But I think that it's important.
Yeah, I think vulnerability there's a lot at risk, and it can end up in a very unsafe feeling environment. But also, if you ever want to feel the safest you've ever felt and the most loved you've ever felt, it's kind of like, do you want to be human all the way? And you're not going to
Mhm.
get there without vulnerability.
Yeah. It's like taking a risk.
Mm-hmm.
We will see you all on our Instagram at This Helps Podcast. And if you made it this far, we appreciate you and would love if you could give us an honest 5-star review on wherever you're listening to your podcast. Well, I think that'll help.
This is me trying.
I think that was great. That's perfect. You both nailed it.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope it helped. Stay connected with us at thishelpspodcast.com.